I'm Dee, and today I'm talking about my experience of porting an Adventuron game to the ZX Spectrum as a complete Spectrum beginner. So this is Barry Basic and the Quest for the Perfect Port. It is a mini game that I made before the jam started. Now, I wouldn't normally make a whole extra game for a game jam, but I wanted to test the extra challenge of this jam, which is to convert the Adventuron game to either Spectrum Plus Free or Spectrum Next using the DAAD Ready system. Now, I am completely new to the ZX Spectrum. I had never even fired one up or used an emulator for it before this jam. I am a BBC Micro girl. That's my 80s computer of choice because it's what I used as a child, which is why this two-room mini adventure is all about porting a BBC Micro game to the Spectrum. The character has never used a Spectrum before, so he's in the same position as me. Now, these were my first attempt at Spectrum-compatible graphics using multi-paint. I normally use GIMP for my graphics, but I needed multi-paint to make sure everything was Spectrum-compatible. For my main jam game, I've made two sets of graphics, one to port to Spectrum Plus Free and one to use for the Adventuron and Spectrum Next versions. But for this small mini game, I just put together a couple of quick Spectrum compatible graphics so that I could see how it worked. So the BBC Micro code here is because that is the basic that I have a very small amount of knowledge in, and when I plugged this test 2 or 3 line code into the Spectrum emulator when I first fired it up a few weeks ago, it didn't work. I needed to write it slightly differently for the basic code to work, but that's, I think, is part of the mysteries of the different versions of BASIC that you had back then. There's only really space for me to learn one at once at the moment, so learning that for the Spectrum will have to wait, I think. So here we are in the Adventuron editor, and this is where I'm going to export DAAD plus graphics. That's the first step you need to do for starting the conversion to the Spectrum. And so I'll save that folder. And you can see here in the editor that in the on startup section, I have printed my loading screen manually. I'll explain why I've done that in a bit. You can see it's also under loading screen. That is where you would put it in normal practice in Adventuron. So I'm now going to take that zip file and I have set up another folder elsewhere for the DAAD process. And this is something I set up a while back, so it's already in existence. Here, this is where you get the DAAD Ready zip file to prepare that folder, which I did quite considerably before this video. I needed quite a few goes to be able to get the conversion working properly. I did run into a few teething issues the first few times I tried it, so at this point I'm going to be extracting the game folder into a DAAD folder that already has a copy of the game in it. So we'll just be overwriting files really at this point. So I'm just going to extract all of these into the folder. and replace all of these files because they need to be overwritten for this new version. Let's tidy that up. So that all should be ready to go now for the conversion. So if we go into command prompt and navigate to the DAAD folder, and go into my Spectrum Free folder, because I've got two separate folders for each version of the game. I find it's a lot easier to keep them separate. And we'll do the .bat file, the .bat file for the plus free version of the game. And this should all be fairly straightforward, this conversion, because, as I say, I've sort of ironed out the kinks now. The first time I tried this, I had a lot of issues of ID conflicts, but that issue has been resolved in the Adventuron editor now, so nobody should be having issues like that, I hope. I certainly haven't had any more since it was fixed in the editor. And we should just be able to press a key to get the emulator up. Now, as I mentioned before, I am a total Spectrum noob, so I had to Google how to load a disk file on this emulator. So go into plus free basic, and that gives us the chance to type stuff. And my typing on this is really, really slow because I'm not used to Spectrum keyboard shortcuts, so I have to sort of sit and remember what they all are, or sometimes go and look them up again, because, as I say, I'm very new to this system. I've not used it before at all. So here, just having a look at the files to see what the disk file is called. And it's just called disk, which is really easy. You can just about remember that. So again, I'm going to do some more slow typing here. Load a disk. And that takes us into the game. Now, I really like that DAAD loading screen, but I also like having my own loading screen on display, even though this one's not much to write home about. It disappears in two halves, so I designed my main Jam game loading screen with that on mind, but that's why I programmed the loading screen to display as part of On Startup back in the Adventuron editor, as I showed you earlier. Now, I really like the way the game looks on Spectrum. I can understand why people like the system so much. My one remaining minor issue with the port is the lack of capitalization in the item list. You can see that the words BBC Micro and ZX Spectrum there are not capitalized as they should be, but it does look really nice on the whole. It's a really nice presentation. On the Spectrum Plus Free, the responses are a bit chuggy, but I think that's probably part of the charm because it would have been like that originally. The graphics look identical on this version to the Adventuron version, which is great. That's what I wanted. I did design them to be Spectrum compatible. As I say, I used multi-paint. Which took a bit of getting used to. I am used to GIMP, but multi-paint is very helpful for making sure everything's going to work on the Spectrum Plus Free emulator. So I go back, and the graphics run very smoothly on the plus free version, I have to say. There's a sort of difference with the next version, which I'll explain when we go into that. Would you like another go? I usually don't want another go when I finished a text adventure, but that is a nice touch, I suppose. I'll maybe have another go some other time. So we'll just have a quick look through the next version as well. So I'm going to navigate to my different folder that I've got for the next version. There are some minor differences with it, so I'm really glad that I tested all of this out at the start of the jam, so that I was aware of the small tweaks that needed to be made between versions. So it's zxnext.bat this time. The next version is slower to compile for this game. I think it may have been the other way round, as I say, for my main jam game when I tried that the other day. But for this version, the next version was slower to compile. I'm not sure what that's about, but it doesn't take forever, so that's fine. Now, when you fire up the next version in the emulator, it just loads automatically. You don't have to do any slow typing. I made a separate half-size loading screen for the next because it doesn't display graphics on the bottom half of the screen at all. Going through, the text responses on the next flow a lot smoother and more quickly than they do on the plus free version. I think that's nicer for a modern user. It feels a lot nicer to use using the next emulator. However, you can see there is a slight delay in refreshing the graphic on a redescribe, and that doesn't happen on the plus free version. I'm not sure what that's about because the text is smoother on the next, you'd think the graphic changes would be smoother as well, whereas they're actually a lot smoother on the plus free version. I'm not sure what that's about at all. But again, it's a very minor issue, and on the whole, it's very nice to play. So I think over the course of a game, I'm probably going to find, over the course of a long game, I think I'm going to find a next version of a game nicer to play than a plus free version. The plus free version is very chuggy. So that is my experience of the process of converting an Adventuron game to an 8-bit system. It's fairly straightforward, certainly a lot more straightforward than having to reprogram everything yourself. It's great that the DAAD conversion tool exists. For me, it's been an introduction to an 8-bit machine that I haven't used before, so that's great. I hope some of you have also been having fun with your Adventuron to Spectrum conversions, and I'm looking forward to playing all of your games.